Welcome to the next video. This one's on documentation, more specifically reporting. This is a big, important soft skill for penetration testing. So we'll cover, some key areas of what your report should look like. Because again, this is what you present to the customers and what gets them to keep coming back. This is also information to kind of help potential customers of penetration testing and what they should look for their reporting. So let's get into it. All right, reporting. So with any slideshow, we should have an agenda, and the agenda here is we're going to cover what should be on your title page or title pages, your executive summary, what that should look like, your scope and approach to the penetration testing, how you grade or scored the findings. And some more of the advanced companies usually have like a journal of that recounts of testing or what they did for testing. And then, of course, the findings. The findings are important for the penetration test. So on your title page, you should have a logo, what type of assessment that it was done, an internal and external, web, API, were you doing iOS or Android app. Uh, Include some kind of warning label letting whoever that receives this report that potentially contains confidential information. It should be protected as such. And then a table of contents breaking down what's in the report and where that's at. Your executive summary should give a brief on what was testing. Should highlight any recommendation actions that the company should take, and then highlight any mitigations or things that stopped you in place. You don't want to just tell the company everything they did bad. You want to tell them what they did good too. For your scope and approach, you want to talk about the standards that you used. Did you follow NIST? Did you follow P-test? Did you follow whatever OSCP taught you? How did you go through your methodology? How did you look at things? You want to include any IPs or URLs that were given to you by the client. This is again, needed for most of the standards like FedRAMP or PCI. And then you also want to document if the test was authenticated, unauthenticated, uh, either network or not network level based, and then for like your web apps, if you're provided user or admin type credentials. For reporting vulnerabilities, you need to have some kind of scoring or grading system, and definitely that should be explained to the customer. How did you get to that criticality? And there's different methods of doing that. A common one that you'll see is kind of CVSS, or another one I've had a lot of experience with is DREAD, and that's damage repeatability, exploitability, affected users, and discovery. Um, and for that scale, each one of those categories for the vulnerability gets rated 1 through 10 and then added up. And if it's, whatever it is, 50 being the highest, basically. And that gives you the criticality of the risk. For CVS, it's more complex than that. They have calculators on the CVSS website and things to kind of help you do that. So the next section, the journal to recount of testing, or this is usually more advanced type pen test companies will have this. So I've seen many different reports as I've done penetration testing, and sometimes we get the reports of the last company coming in and done the test to kind of see where they focused, and it's surprising to see a lot of this is not on there, or it's not very clear what they did. Um, sometimes I've seen it as just a chart or a table where they just say the we expect to do network scans and there's no clear text ports, and we found that there are clear text ports open, and that's on a table. And so how do you get any value out of that? How did you do the scans? How do I even know you scanned the right network? How do I know that you just didn't check a box or something? So um, I think this is a big value add. And if you're looking at a company and looking at their sample report, or if you've looked at your past pen test reports, this should be on there. This should be very documented. This is what you're paying for. Um, this section should also be different for every client, and that shows that the penetration testing company is actually valuing what they're doing and not just another pen test puppy mill, or not really providing anything more than a scan or anything like that. If they're not showing you what they're doing, they're more likely just doing scans and not really doing anything. Um, and again, it should show the assessor's process. How did they do whatever they were doing and then get to the conclusion that they found a vulnerability, right? Like I said, this is usually not on most pen test reports, and that's the shame of it. And we'll go over some pen test reports and show that off. And then findings. This is the bread and butter. Usually we have the whole reason for a pen test is to understand what findings we're getting. So the name of the finding should be there. How did you get to the criticality of the finding? How was it graded? What's the summary of the finding? What's a little bit of information about it? What host did you find this finding on? Can you show me that you actually did what you said you did? That's your proof of concept. Do you have recommendations on how to fix this? And then any references leading to why this finding is important, like OWASP or NIST or CVE, something to kind of show why this is an important finding. So as you work in pen testing and you do this over and over and over, what you find is that you have a lot of the same areas or same type of areas in the report that can be static, but there's some parts that need to be dynamic. And there's I couldn't find a good project that would kind of help out with writing the report currently. I used to use Serpico a lot, and for that you basically put in these special characters at certain areas to define like your title, like what type of assessment it was, your client, your scope, how the type of findings and the finding details and stuff like that, and then basically it's a web app, and you would put all that stuff in there and then click go and it would spit out the report, and then you still would have to do some editing because there was just things that it messed up the formatting on, or just couldn't handle everything. The next tool, Ghostwriter, that one's a newer type tool, and I could not get the Docker image to work correctly. I was getting a lot of production and database errors trying to seed that, so I wasn't able to use that at all. PondDoc I was able to use, but I was not able to get the report out of PondDoc. So and it looked very promising, and looked like it was easier, but I couldn't tell you if that was going to work correctly or not because the document wouldn't come back out. But the formatting of the areas that you wanted to define as variables and stuff like that wasn't too hard. I think it was as simple as just like a curly bracket and then client and then a closed curly bracket. And then for your finding sections, it was a little bit more than that, but again, it wouldn't really generate the report, so I couldn't give you a full analysis on that. So currently, you're just kind of stuck with a template and then maybe a database of findings and then kind of populating manually like that. And that's usually kind of how some places do it. Some places end up developing their own internal reporting tool, and those, of course, never get released. And so, that's the problem with this is that it's hard to find anything because penetration testing report writing is kind of a very niche, but it benefits everybody if there was something that works there. So again, I'm not the end-all be-all expert on penetration testing reports, and here's some examples of where you could see multiple examples of penetration testing report. And depending on your company, you want to mix and match and kind of build your own brand of this. But I'm going to look at some of the pen test reports on pentestreports.com, and we'll go over those and highlight some of the bigger things that I found value as a customer, and I found value as providing as a penetration tester. So let's start off with that. So the first report that we'll look at is the OSCP report. So if you've ever taken the OSCP, you should have seen this report. And let's just highlight that some of the sections similar to what we were talking about before, right? So we do have a title page. It is describing what the testing was on. So it's a penetration test report for internal lab and exam. Again, it has a contact information, has a logo. There's your kind of confidentiality statement there. About this document, again, kind of is given somewhat of a summary here. There's your table of contents. Introduction, so it's kind of giving you an introduction. There's your objectives, requirements, high-level summary. So this, I would say is probably similar to what you would kind of highlight, maybe an executive summary. Yeah, and it's kind of pointing that out and then showing here that they're able to gain access to that one system, and then there's your recommendations. The only thing that I see immediately with this format is, again, everything kind of runs very fluid, and so there's no real breaks. I mean, you do kind of get a break from 1.3 to 2 because it has the header there, and there's a definition there, but immediately from 2.1 to 3, there's no break there, and so that kind of your eyes are trying to figure out where I want to focus on. For the methodology there, a very thin methodology statement, and then it's going into the exact thing. So the problem with this report here is we're defining our methodology, and then we're saying what we're going to do, and then we're doing it exactly after that. So in a bigger environment, like this can get very messy quick. So it's hard. It would be hard to kind of read this and understand what ports did you find and things like that. So we can see here, for information gathering, they're saying that they found one IP. They're able to get the port numbers for the IP here. And then here is your finding question mark. So here's your finding title. I would say that's probably where it's at. There's your host affected, right? A description of the vulnerability. A little bit more description. And then vulnerability pick. So this would be like your remediation, no known patch or update. So again, for a client though, that doesn't really help them providing a no known patch or update. You could. There's something you could do here, right? You could maybe run this as a Docker container or run this as something, a very low privilege on the system or whatever you would have to do this, or again upgrade the client, something to that effect, or have them contact the manufacturer or whoever makes the software to fix this patch, or patch this vulnerability. There's a severity, it shows that it's critical. But again, on this finding, we're not seeing how did you get to critical. What was your scoring methodology? How did you get to that scoring of critical or risk rating of a critical? Then they break again, very very much flows from one part to another, so it's really hard to tell where your finding stops or doesn't stop. We can see now they're in information gathering, and so now they're showing the steps and processes that they did, but there's no context here, right? It's just full nmap scan of all ports, okay? NICTO scan on port 80, okay? Contents of targets robot.txt. So did you find a robot.txt? Why is that beneficial that you found a robot.txt? Further enumeration of port 80 using a browser, okay? Searching exploit DB for POC on KitKat vulnerability. So, I mean, I get what you're doing here, but there's a little bit of context, a little bit of text helps kind of flow this a little bit more. Proof of concept code, confirming RC using the code, command issue, custom PHP. So you can kind of see that you can see what they're doing, but you're not understanding how are they getting this or why are they doing this way. And that goes a long way there. Then they talk about getting a low privilege shell, using RC vulnerability, create a PHP file called shell that will download nc.txt, save it as a batch file, create hosting. So this is showing you the steps that they're doing. This screenshot here is practically useless. It's too small a text. You can't really see what they're doing. I'd break this up. I would make this smaller or highlight what do I care about in this screenshot. These other ones are pretty readable. And again, I even had to zoom in on this one here, and not until I zoom in completely do you see more of the details on that. I would have broke out whatever command I ran and put this up here as text. This is the command I ran, and then maybe provide the output or a screenshot of the output, even if it's clipped a little bit or something. This is just unreadable basically for the report. Privilege escalation. So then they're talking about using Metasploit. Again, it's not giving you much detail why you're using Metasploit. How is it going to give you more privileges or anything like that? And then noticing too that this report here, they were able to run get system. There's things that you can do in place that would be another finding for me. Whatever this service level was running at, was there anything on there that kind of stopped me from putting evil.exe on the server, kind of highlighting that stuff. That would be good mitigations. And then proof file just shows they were able to get the proof. And then report for house cleaning. Again, you probably wouldn't have this in an actual pen test report. And then that's it. So pretty small, 14 pages. Again, it's the OSCP report. They're just kind of showing off how to report this type of stuff and what you should report. So, all right, so that's the OSCP. And again, if you've ever done OSCP, you would have seen this report. So let's look at the next one. This one's from ISEC Partners. They're part of the NCC group. So again, you can see a nice title page. We can tell what they were testing. So Open Technology Fund CryptoCat iOS. It's an application penetration test. Who the test was done for and who it was prepared by. So again, this gives you that contact information. Who did the test. There's a small disclaimer statement. Basically for this one here, so they're just basically legalizing, saying that they can't take anything. They're not responsible for errors, omissions, damage resulting from the information. So nothing about like how to, what level you should kind of protect this report at or anything like that. Changelog, sometimes this is good too. It kind of shows if you go through multiple changes or if the document you know needs to go through multiple changes. It also helps to make sure that you guys, whoever's, if you want to have someone else proofread your work, and it lets you know that whatever version they're on is the latest version. There's your table of contents, so again, good on that. And then now we're jumping into our executive summary. So for the executive summary here, we see that they're kind of breaking it down into sections, and just very very lightly telling you exactly whatever they did. This is usually kind of different. This should usually be more kind of verbiage, and we'll see that with the other reports too. A little bit of explanation. Um, this, I can see this being both ways. It's very to the point, exactly what they did, but also, it's not very. It's a it's a toss up really on the if this is a really good executive summary or not. Vulnerabilities, again highlighting vulnerabilities in the executive summary, and then breakdown. So for the risk summary, pretty cool little chart. They have they look at stuff via attack system sophistication and user risk. From high to low, simple to difficult, and then they basically kind of put their findings on there. Here's your summary of the project, the dates that it happened between. So this is good. This covers for like PCI or FedRAMP. Again, those are the two assessments that I have the most experience with. So both of them require you to list out dates and stuff like that. Best effort within a given time frame. I don't know if I'd put that in my report. So again, yeah, they're looking at iOS APIs. So they're again giving you a summary of what they're doing, right? Common API flaws in the implementation of cryptographic protocols, remote exploitable vulnerabilities, perform the testing on the client using the iOS simulator and physical iDevices. So again, they're telling you how they did the test too. And then they are explaining anything out of scope. So again, this is much needed for PCI or FedRAMP too, is that you explain what's out of scope. So now you have a finding summary, which is good. Kind of gives you a summary of what's going on. The only thing I would added to here is some kind of rating or risk on this summary. Does the design flaws, is that critical to me? Is that not critical? Do I need to focus on this? It says it's the most serious problem. So, can I have a pop of color or something to kind of catch my eye at this? Tell me that this is important, right? To me, it's just text on text on text, right? So, they were talking about specific vulnerabilities. That's good. And then recommendation summary. So this is, a good thing here. They're talking about short term, what can be done. They're breaking it down into each of the findings, it looks like, and then long term, what they need to kind of do or think about. So now they're talking about the engagement structure. I would have had this more before my findings or recommendations. Again, especially since it's kind of in between the summary and the detailed findings. Yeah, I would have had this more up before this, because again, if I'm reading the recommendations and I'm like, oh, cool, I I manage the TLS stuff for the XMPP connections. I want to see this. So then I'm scrolling down and the next header is engagement structures? Question mark? Like that doesn't make sense to me. I would had the detailed findings next. So they're breaking their detailed findings into classifications, and they do it by vulnerability classes. So they focus like on access control, auditing, logging, authentication, configuration, and then severity classes: informational, undetermined, low, medium, high. So, and then difficulty level. Okay. So then here's your vulnerabilities. So again, there's a table. Cool. Nothing pops out to me at this. So they say that they're high severity, but again, this is just very plain text on white background. Um, Give me some pop, some color, something to stand out. Why is this important? If I'm just scrolling through this report, all I'm seeing is black and white with some grays here and there, right? So nothing really stands out to me. So let's look at the findings in details, right? So we do have a header. Um, we have the detailed vulnerability list, so this is all of them. And then for the finding, we're looking at the XAMPP control. They specified what class that it fell into, their severity and difficulty. So I have how they rated the two areas, but um, it looks like, yeah, they're not mashing, you know, they're not mashing that up anywhere besides just saying that's a high severity. So just difficulty. They have a finding ID. That looks like it's some kind of internal finding ID there. Targets. So the iOS application, and then they're kind of with the iOS apps. They're specifying what dates that they did it because again, if a new app came out, then that kind of makes that sense. Here's your description. So that's a pretty good detailed description. Tells you specifically about XMPP. And then the exploit scenario. So this is talking a little bit about what it would take, and then short-term solution, long-term solutions. In this finding here, I don't see any screenshots. I do see as a proof of concept, though, we have this. Again, I would show something. I would have a little bit impact here. They do seem to be doing it on the rest of their screenshots, and that's kind of pointed out. The things with the iOS and Android applications is when you're testing them, a lot of majority of your findings are going to be mostly in the code that you either decompile or able to get to semi back to source. And so that's kind of what they're highlighting here is code. And so having this colorization of the code definitely makes it stand out. I can focus on what you're wanting to be able to look at in the code here. So we're not seeing any references for any of the findings. Where did you get this from? Did you pull it out of thin air? Why do you feel like this is this way? They're describing it a little bit here in the description, but reference to something, a standard or something would help out. So again, they're highlighting the specific line here, which is good. You want your screenshots to matter. If you have a screenshot in there, you should be able to know or understand what you're looking at. All right, so that's pretty much it there. It looks like, again, you can see this is 35 pages long, so a little bit more details. They're definitely giving a lot more context of stuff in here. The only things that we did not see in this report was, how did they do the testing? How did they go through the testing? I don't even really think they had like a methodology section. Yeah, yes. So testing methodology, white box. That's the only methodology. So they're not really explaining how they went through that. What does white box mean? Did you get all the source code or not? Um, Nothing's kind of really saying that. And if it did, it's not really standing out in this report. All right, so let's move on to Red Siege. So again, nice title page, logo, standing out. This is an external network pen test report, company, date. We're missing some kind of notification on how we should protect this report. So we're missing that. We do have a table of contents. Here's our executive summary. So a little different executive summary. I'm not a big fan of the two columns there. I think it's just because they're maybe trying to cram more data into this. But we do have some color. We have some pop here. We can see a graph. We see, um, how many types of findings that we have. Where they're highlighting the vulnerabilities here, and then recommendations, or strategic recommendations as I call it here. Nice statement, a little bit thanking the company for letting them do the test. All right, so finding summary. So immediate difference, right, from the last report. We see this has lots of color. We can see what's important here compared to this finding summary, which if I probably have already scrolled by it and you can't even tell. So yeah, there's the finding summary. So again, having that pop of color stands out easily what that is. So here, each vulnerability or risk is identified, labeled as a finding, categorized. The vulnerability should be addressed promptly. So here's their findings classification, and then straight into the findings. Again, we're breaking this up. We have these on separate pages. The only thing I'm not seeing on this findings classification, unlike here, is how are we grading these findings? How are we getting to critical, high, medium, or low? Same thing in the finding details, right? We're not. We have the title, okay? So lack of multi-factor authentication. I always don't like how some companies will put in this little thing as part of their finding or whatever that is. This one kind of did it here too with the title. That's the engagement structure. Yeah, see, like right here, finding ID. They didn't put it in the title, which is great. Yeah, finding ID right there. So putting it in your title, that really has no value to me as a customer. It just makes it confusing. What is my finding? Some places will offer like an Excel spreadsheet, and that might be the reasoning for that, and that makes it easier. But anyways, so critical risk authentication. Here's the impact. So a little bit of description. Affected systems. So we have the IP address here, or DNS name, whatever that is. Description of that, and then recommendations, and then reference. And then validation, and then we have the next finding. So the only thing with this here is that we have findings running into findings, and there's no separation. So if I have a finding here, like this is two-factor authentication, and I would probably give this to the web app team, right? I want them to go do their thing, and say this report was printed off for whatever reason. How do I give this page now password reuse? This is my AD team. My AD team would take care of this. But if I hand this page off to the AD team, now the AD team gets however the validation is needed for the web app stuff. So having this as a different finding similar like what we kind of saw here is where that page break happens whenever you do the finding. I'm not saying everything has to be on one page, and that's not the case, um, but you should have it definitely start a new page whenever it gets to that finding, so it's easier to kind of break that up. Okay, so they're kind of giving again how to do stuff. There's definitely you can definitely see defined areas or where code's at, um, where screenshots are at. Screenshots make sense to this stuff. Here's another good thing, and again, this will depend on the pen test company and then also the customer. Um, some companies don't like to include username and passwords or uh, not not include them without being obfuscated at some degree. Again, that's something internally you need to figure out with the company that you're working for, or if you're running, and then also with the clientele, whoever you're working for, if they want the passwords in there or they don't want them in there. I've had both. I've had customers wanting to know the passwords that we found because again they want to validate that it got changed. So if this is my thing that I hand off to the customer, um, how can I validate that they changed the password if I don't know it, right? So, yep, nice color pop at the findings, whatever they're wanting us to look at, highlighted, stands out, makes sense. Here's the methodology section. So the methodology I would had, before all the findings. Again, I want to know how you're going to do the test before I, give you all the findings. Um, the bad part about this, though, is that this page was intentionally left blank. This section includes examples of techniques used to assess the target systems. So, it's hard to tell if they would have provided much detail or what level of detail they would have provided in here. But that's what we would have want to seen. And then they have an appendix. Again, you can sometimes have an appendix for definitions or like if you're doing PCI, maybe you want to have a diagram of the PCI environment, stuff like that. List of figures. I don't, I don't see the value of this page here. I mean, again, if we have a table of contents, then that should have some of that information in there. Um, yeah, so list of figures really I don't feel like provides any value there at the end. All right, so that was Red Siege. The next one is going to be Rhino Security Labs. So again, uh, definitely a different style of title page. We can see this is an assessment report, internal network pen test. It was for this company, who did it, what the date was. And again, you can almost immediately tell the difference, right? Like how their headers and formats are. Um, yeah, you can tell this is more commercialized. Um, here's your account team. Here's the client detail. Here's the scope summary. There's your engagement overview. Campaign objectives. And so again, very commercialized, very nice, very stands out. You can see that they put the members of whoever tested on there. There's the qualifications, things like that. Some of your tests actually require that you specify who tested and what their qualifications are. Just again to make sure that it's not just Joe off the street who has no idea about security. And we haven't seen that before now. Like this report didn't have whoever tested. This one, if it did, it didn't really stand out. There's your internal assessment team. Yeah, so not really. not really picking out. This actually looks more just like it's a no. There's yep, security engineers. Okay. There's our process and methodology. So again, we're you know we're telling you our objectives. We're telling you who's going to be doing the testing, and then we're telling you how they're going to do it. There's the scope. So again, black box, host, executive finding of summaries. So again, we're giving the executive, here's the internal network risk rating. I would make this a little bit more clear if this is the entire network or is this, just a couple findings. It looks like it's the entire network. Ease of exploitation and potential impact of business. Reviewed security. Critical risk of compromise. I should by presence. Okay. Detailed. All right. Found later. Okay. So that is what they're kind of doing there. So again, nice pop of color. Definitely, in my face, I can see, oh crap, I need to do something about my network, right? Here's the summary of strengths. So they're highlighting what they found was good, and then what they found as, as weaknesses, and then some strategic recommendations how to fix this stuff. You'll notice again, we're breaking pages whenever we're done with this section. So, this section was talking about executive summary of findings, and we're not just flowing right into the next thing. We page break, and then we're talking executive summary narrative. All right, so this is a perfect example of assessor's detailed notes, right? What they're doing. They're talking about how they began the scanning. They were able to browse an SMB share. They're highlighting stuff that they found in the SMB share due to the admin account was given within the suitors group, so they're able to SSH into other systems. Additionally, the machine at whatever had SSH enabled, led to disclosure, and so then there's the AWS creds. So again, I can take this, I can follow the same path that they did, and make sure that I close up all these holes, or that I close off the paths or the chains of exploits or chains of misconfigurations. I'm able to follow through, understand what they did. Here's showing them that they were able to do VNC. So they're also giving narratives, right? Like I have enough data gathered and gleaned from the Unix side assessment to move on to the Windows Active Directory audit. Giving an example of a hash that was recovered. So again, you notice that they didn't, they did block out some parts of the hash here. To exploit it, command added an account to the local users. They're showing that they were added to their the account. Again, screenshots with impact. I'm highlighting things. I'm showing you exactly what I need you to look at. Without the red highlights in this screenshot, this would be a very busy screenshot, right? Like I would have no idea I needed to care about Hyper-V, and that I need to care about that you added Thomas Manning to this, and who is he? Same thing here. Without that being highlighted, I would not known that you had executed something via the remote registry. Here's another good screenshot. Again, the text is readable. We can see what they're wanting us to understand. Yep. Okay, so they're even talking about what tools they used. Empire Remote Control Agent through remote desktop interface. Should be noted that even though Carbon Black was supposedly running on the server, this generic unmodified staging code was not detected. So they're even highlighting some of the EDR that was not effective. And again, that's in the narrative. That's stuff that I could be like, oh crap, if I read through this report, why didn't the EDR fire off on that? Let's get with the EDR guys and figure that out. Here's them retrieving passwords. They obfuscated the clear text passwords in this one instead of just blocking it out like the last one. So again, very good detailed assessor's notes. I can tell that these guys did work. I can see the steps in the process that they went through. I feel like this is a report that's worth value, right? So now they're moving on to findings. How do they grade findings? How do they rate findings? So there's vulnerabilities. They go from critical to informational. Okay. Nice table here showing me numbers. There's a chart here with the finding, a little bit of description, and the risk level. Always go from your highest to your lowest. Again, pops of color. I can tell that these are more important than these down here. All right, so now we're going into the detailed vulnerability findings. We have a title. We have a risk rating, critical. How did we get to that? That was the likelihood of exploitation is high and the potential impact is critical. Excellent. Description. So we have a good description of what's going on. Then we have the affected host. All Windows machines. I probably wouldn't put all Windows machines on this one. I would have put something a little bit more specific. Again, this is kind of too generic. If I need to go patch or if I need to go make sure I got every system, I would want to have that a little bit better. In this finding, I know why they did it. LLMNR and NetBIOS name service is not, if the system didn't talk out, then I wouldn't know the IP address. So, but you could have scanned or you could have maybe, try to provide that information or maybe got more details. They, looked like they owned the company, so it wouldn't be too hard to get a list of servers or systems and missing that configuration that you could have pulled. So remediation, again, disable LMNR, and then testing process. So here's how to test how they their proof of concept basically. Again, I would probably maybe put that above the remediation. I like to have the remediation at the end because, again, that's kind of wrapping up the finding for me. A nice, again, fadeaway section here. This is the end of that finding. We're going on to a new page. So again, I can pass those pages to whoever is in charge of that. That's perfect. SMB signing or disabled or not required. So again, good title. We have the impact. They're putting their references here right under the description. And then same thing with for remediation, they have references. We also have the exact ports and host, so good there. And then the testing process, how did they get there? Proof of concepts, basically. So again, very good. Detailed findings, very good in showing detail of what they did, how did they get there, showing the impact of what they found. So on and so forth. Excellent. So good stuff. Colors change whenever the risks change. Perfect. Lets me know, where I'm at in the report. Lets me know what I'm looking at. Again, we're referencing CVEs here. This is a really good report. This is a high tailor end one. All right. And then they wrap up telling you the tools that they use, which is good. Changes to the environment. So I guess this is them documenting if they've made any changes, which, and then their end of their report. Cool. All right, so then the next one up, TCM Security, the Cyber Mentor. So again, we have a title page, we have a logo, we have a company, what type of report that we're doing, business confidential. So that's, I guess, come somewhat of a statement of where level this should be at. I think, let's see if they said that too. I don't remember if they did. So maybe that's the only thing I would ding on Rhino Labs is that they don't have any confidentiality statement. Like that this report should be, protected, yada yada. Again, it describes vulnerabilities, things like that. Table of contents. So good table of contents there. We can tell that the logo was kind of just pasted on there. You see the grayish background a little bit, so it's not completely, you know, invisible or anything like that. So it kind of does stand out a little bit to the eye. There's the confidentiality statement. Again, very clear on there. Legal disclaimer that this is a snapshot in time. I think that was kind of missing from some of the other reports, saying again that this is a snapshot in time when this happens. Contact information, so there's a way to contact them. Assessment overview, from what date to what date. There's a description of their methodology. Here's what they were testing, external, and then their ratings. They're doing CVSS and going from 0.01 or NA to 10. For the scope, there's the scope there. They're also including an Excel file, it looks like, if they had it. Any exclusions. So again, it's for PCI and FedRAMP. If you had any exclusions, you would need to note that. Executive summary. All right. So paragraph introduction of what was going on. Highly recommended that that DC address these vulnerabilities. All right. The following table describes how they gain access to the internal network. Gained internal network access step by step. Step 1, obtain breached account information. And then a recommendation. So I don't like this format. Again, one of the big things I think I said in the presentation, don't put stuff like this in a table. This is the executive summary, so I would highlight your recommendations or whatever you found, but not in this format. It just doesn't look right. It's hard to read. Highlighting strengths, highlighting weaknesses. That's good there. Vulnerabilities by impact. So again, we have one critical vulnerability, and then do we have a 0.1 high, 0.1 medium, 0.1 low? I wouldn't have put these there, or I would have had a couple number of findings to kind of make this make more sense. And then here's the finding. So immediately looking at this finding, does it stand out to you? Does it look critical? Uh, you know, I see that it is critical, but not like when we looked at Rhino Labs just a minute ago, where it pops with a color and hits you in the face and says, "Hey, this is critical. I'm a bright orange or a bright red, right?" Um, Now I'm finding it. There we go. Here's exactly I can tell this critical. Same thing with Red Siege, right? Bam, bright red, critical finding. Can tell this is critical. This is hiding in a table up here. It's very, doesn't really stand out to me. For the host here, they have one host. So I can see that if you were doing a bigger penetration test, like this table would look really horrible with that, with a lot of hosts in here. Like maybe you have OpenSSL not upgraded on hundreds of internal servers. And so what would this table look like? How that would look horrible having that in there. Exploitation, proof of concept. Okay, so that they gathered. So the finding is insignificant lockout policy. Okay, and then I guess they're walking us through how did they get to this. So they got the credentials. They used the credentials for stuffing attack against the OA. So okay, so this is an example of the breach stuff. Then here's again highlighting the area that they want us to focus on, because again, this is just very plain Jane looking text. Nothing stands out without that highlight, right? And then, successful login. So that's the finding. So I don't know, there's a lot going on with this. So they have insignificant lockout policy, right? But I mean, there's talk about then um, using the credentials to log into VPN. So is there not two-factor authentication on the VPN? And if not, why isn't that a finding? Yeah, so and here's they're saying that in the remediation, right? OA permitted unlimited log. So that would all, these would be separate findings for me with separate remediation actions. I would had OA doesn't require multi-factor. That had been one finding, and that's kind of what they're saying up here. So that's fine, right? But then you have these additional remediations, allowed brute forcing. That would have been another finding with this remediation. Uh, is this true though? So this is saying that they have a weak password policy. How do you know that? How did you get to that? Where does it show that they have a weak password policy in this? I see that you tried summer 2018. So what you consider a weak password policy? We see 14 characters or longer. Use different passwords for each account accessed. Again, two users could have the same passwords, and is it possible? It's possible. It's improbable that it might happen. Do not use words or proper names in passwords regardless of language. Okay. That's not an easy thing to configure in an AD, and you're not really giving me much to use here, right? And again, maybe in the full report that might give more details, but that you have to almost buy additional software to configure that in AD. It's not something that you can just set up and say, you can't use summer as a password. It's not going to work that way. OA permitted username enumeration, DC synchronized validation and count. Okay, so again, I would have broken these out into different vulnerabilities and different remediations. Having that many remediations in one thing um, just kind of shows that you're not trying to show them exactly all the findings. Um, and again, that might not speak to the company or whatever. They handle their pen test how they want to handle it. But that's just what I pull out of that. Provides all report information gathered during testing. All right, so that's great gravy. I find that majority of the time, companies, if you could get them to just read this finding part, that's gonna be about as much as they do. Um, Majority of companies don't have time to sit here and digest all your scan results and all that stuff and look at all your vulnerabilities, summaries and all they care about is this right here. Like, what do I need to do? How does this affect me? How do I fix it? Past that, um, they're not going to look at it, most of that data. So, all right, so that's a review of 4 different companies, and then I want to show similar to what I came up with and what I've been kind of using. So again, same kind of type of title page. You put your company logo up here. Talk about what assessment, what application or product you're using, who the author is, date, time, company name, assessor's contact info. Again, this could also be, credentials similar to like what Rhino Labs had, currently holds whatever, OSCP, GXPen, GWAP, whatever. And then for me, again, notices. So again, I stated that this should be, protected information. Again, it might have sensitive information in there, and so it should be protected as much. Then we have a table of contents. This would be populated, of course, based on whatever information's in the actual report. Here's the executive summary. Again, it's in a verbiage format saying what we did. Overall company, noted that it's secure or unsecure in that manner, and that did or did not present, mitigation factors. So again, speaking to the highlights of whatever the company was doing here. And then recommended actions, again, from high to low. So what does the company need to focus on to get this fixed correctly? Scope and approach, so how what frameworks are being used to kind of do the assessment. So in my case, I heavily sit on OWASP, NIST, and then PTEST, OSSTM, CIS, and SANS, right? And then for scope, specifying out IP addresses and URLs. And then talking about if the testing was conducted in an authenticated or unauthenticated fashion. I noticed that was kind of missing from a majority of the applications. We didn't look at any web app pen test, and that would have been more interesting to kind of see. But yeah, also talking in a web app sense, was I provided users or admin accounts? Was I provided both? Did I test privileges? Things like that. So then the next section, I broke down scoring methodology. How are we looking at scoring? How do we get to where we rate risk? What categories are we looking at? So in this sense, looking at CVSS, looking at threat agents, vulnerability factors, threat impact, business impact. Those at a high level break down to low, medium, high for likelihood and impact levels. And then you basically, take your impact and your likelihood, and that, if it's low or medium or high, and low, medium or high, and that's where you get at on the chart there. And then each one of those got broken down even further. So for threat agent factors, we're looking at the skill level, how technical is this group of threat actors? So, what would it take for an attacker, no computer skills, or full-on pen test skills. Motive, is there a motive for, is there low or no reward, or is there like, I have Bitcoins and I'm making bank now. Um, yeah, and so each one of these kind of just gets broken down into how that rating is. So the Assessor's Journal of Testing, again, very much in detail, starting off, what are you testing? How did that go from this to the next step? Did you, what were you testing? Were you scanning for SMB vulnerabilities? Did you find any? If you found one, what did it give you? How did you move on? So, very much in depth, and this could be several pages long with screenshots and stuff like that, with captions on the screenshots and highlighting, similar to like the Rhino Labs. And then you have a finding summary. So again, breaking down, there's that pop of color, critical, high, medium, low, and informational. These also would be colored, and the findings would be colored. So if I had a critical finding of SQL injection, the impact would be high, likelihood would be high, and that whole line of text would be also that darker red. And then each of the sections they have their breakdown verbiage of what the findings are, and so critical findings and vulnerabilities, why you should care about them, and then here's how I broke down the findings title. So again, we have the finding. Here's the score summary. So we broke down the chart. This goes straight back up to that scoring system that we had up at in the section above. And then, that breaks down to a high, medium, or low. And then based on that, that's where you get to criticality. So you can see I highlighted high here, and then critical there. Summary of finding. So again, detailed information about the summary of finding. Host, so whatever hosts were affected. Again, you see it's a bulleted list. This could also be a lot of text if that's what it would if it's finding that would be throughout. What I've done in the past though is make this multiple columns. So I'll put this out to be 3 columns if this is a lot of data. Again, depending on the finding, that could still be a lot, but that's a better format and it doesn't look as bad as if I had it in a table or something like that. Proof of concept, again, similar to like Rhino Labs. You show how you got there, highlighting the areas of what matters and what's there. Recommendations, having the detailed recommendations of how to fix that, and then references to CVEs or to NIST or to CIS or whatever that is, right? And then same thing, repeats section. So you'll see here, this is the high findings, so impact ends up being medium at some point, and then likelihood is high or reverse, high and then medium here, and that still would be high up here. So again, this ends up unfortunately a lot more detail oriented and a lot more manual. And that's what some of these companies are looking to do, is just kind of not have as much manual editing. So these findings, what you normally do then is you would have these like in a database type thing. You would have all the numbers saved out into a database or another spreadsheet, and then or however you would do it, and then copy and paste those. If you don't have any web application that would do it, that similar to like the Pond Docs or the Ghostwriter or whatever. And so that's the best way that you can automate that. You can actually build in macros and use SQL databases in Word docs and stuff like that. But yeah, that's kind of past, unless you really have time to do all that. So the only other thing, again, that's kind of missing out of my report, is maybe I didn't list any credentials or anything up here. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a good review to kind of see what other companies are doing, and definitely, seeing it from a customer's point of view, but also from an assessor's point of view. Again, to summarize, before we wrap up, the big things that are going to make big impacts on your report, right, is having that pop of color in there, not having just plain Jane text all the time. Having colors throughout the report. Again, these highlights, of course, would be out. This is template, but even like here, I have light blues for sections, dark blues for sections. You can see colors for when I'm grading risk and things like that. similar to like what Rhino Labs had. Again, they have pops of color throughout the report. Their headers and stuff like that very stand out. So this shows that this is more than just a it, it is definitely a product, but it's also more thoughtful, more involved product than just a plain black and white text document that is hard to tell where things start and stop. Again, we have some pop of color to define a finding, but not like is this critical? I don't know. It doesn't really stand out to me, right? Um, Another thing that would really make you stand out as a penetration tester is this information here, this assessor's journal of testing, the or whatever you want to call it, assessor's notes, um, exploit journey, whatever, um, showing off how you got to where you're going gives the customer always more value for their money, even if they don't read it. If someone else reads it later, they're gonna say, okay, I'm cool with that firm. I wanna have them back, right? Um, you you might be doing something for a company like for PCI, right? And they hired you to do the internal test, and they might not read the report, but the PCIS, the company who does the PCI certification reads the report and says, okay, yes, I can see that they checked off all the boxes, right? That they talked about what they did. They definitely demonstrated that they did network attacks and application layer attacks and stuff like that. And again, if that's what you're doing for a company, make sure you read whatever checklist that they have. So for PCI, it's very detailed exactly what needs to be done, and they have a checklist in that PCI checklist in PCI sheet. For FedRAMP, same thing. They have very specific scenarios that have to be tested and highlighted. And I want to say, different banks and stuff like that also have something similar, I'm sure. So having that in there. And then for your findings, break up your findings. After you're done with your references, do a page break. Like have a definition of where your findings start and stop. It just makes it easier on the eyes. It makes it easier to kind of, you know, have that ability to know where I need to stop looking at stuff sometimes, or if I can print this off, pass it off to someone to go do something. And then risk ratings. All your findings should have risk ratings. I should be able to understand as a customer how you got to that risk. I've seen it numerous times, and you guys saw it even on this stream, that sometimes it's not very clear how you get to that risk. What if I have mitigating factors that I could explain? How do I, how can I explain those if I don't know how you got to that? So yeah, that's my wrap up of this. I hope this helps you write your reports better. I wish there was some tools that kind of help automate this process. And if one of the tools, come back to working status, or I find something that might able to kind of start using, then I'll definitely produce a video on that, because again, this is the hardest part of pen testing, is the report writing and conveying this to the customer. And yes, some of the stuff has to be manual, and some of it has to be, um, you know, tailored for the customers. But some of it is repeatable, and some of it is, can be just basically copy and pasted, like the findings and stuff like that. Again, depending on how you should still review your findings, and make sure whatever rating that they had still is valid for that environment, because that can happen too. So, but the title's not going to change. The summary of findings not going to change. Um, Recommendations are probably not going to change, and your references are not going to change. So that's kind of more where the copy pasting comes in, and having that same type of data there. All right. I hope that was helped you out a lot, and hope to see some better pen test reports out there. And I'll catch you on the next one. Thanks. Bye.